Building the energy infrastructure of a low-carbon future is a complex challenge, shaped by shifting narratives on the transition, its timeline, and its constituents. The process is getting even more difficult in light of the growing geopolitical instability, energy security concerns, and an impending global trade war. So how should the energy industry navigate this uncertainty? I discuss this with my guest from Milan, Alessandra Pasini, co-founder, CEO and president at Zhero, a clean energy developer and the company behind the Medlink project that aims to bring green power produced in Algeria and Tunisia to Italy and Europe via subsea transmission lines. Hello, Alessandra, and welcome to the Future of Energy program.
Hello, and nice to meet with you today for this conversation, Naser.
Thank you. Do you get a sense, Alessandra, that the discussion about the transition is moving away from the hype of the last few years and maybe maturing into a more honest and practical conversation lately? What do you think is driving this change, and how will it ultimately impact how the world invests in energy infrastructure?
Yes, indeed. I think there is more pragmatism feeding through and creeping through both policymakers, regulators, and developers. And I think this is good because ultimately projects in the energy space require years to be designed, engineered, and developed. And you need to make sure that these are affordable. And so I think that we clearly sit today in 2025 after years where we had COVID, where we had disruption in Europe with the Ukraine war, and now a trade tariff tension. So clearly all of this has helped some of this hype, as you referred to go down, and I think has helped all of us, developers and industry participants, to focus on those projects that make economic sense first and leave for better times, both in terms of lowering inflation, lower cost of funding, and lower cost of equipment, those projects that today are not in the money. But the good news is that there is a lot that can be done today with existing technologies and that make economic sense and that can deliver bankable projects as Medlink, as you referred to. And that's what people like us should be focused on doing.
What do you think is really needed to get the ball rolling on clean energy projects from a regulatory perspective? Would more subsidies do the trick? Or how can we leverage the current energy infrastructure that we have today in a better way to move forward more effectively on the net zero transition path?
I think that there is, we need to distinguish molecules from power and electrons. On the molecule side, and so on e-fuels, there's been a lot of discussion. The reality is that very little has been implemented in terms of real subsidies. And so investors need clarity. And so if subsidies were to be in place, they would have helped the market to move. However, I think that the most relevant action and lever that regulators could activate are more blending mandates. So focus on sectors that are more in need of molecules as the only solution for their decarbonization, and try to help those first, or alternatively, those that are more close to the tipping point, whereby the funding gap, so to speak, would be smaller. And I think that the blending mandates is the most intelligent and efficient way at times where there is trade tension and where costs remain still high and sustained on the equipment to help the industry going. Because if you blend 5% or 2% or whatever small percentage of green fuel within fossil fuel, you dilute the higher cost of that component on the overall supply, and you therefore help the people that needs to undertake that commitment to dilute the increased cost on a much larger base. So our view is that on the molecule side, blending mandates, it's super important, and we are clearly watching what the IMO will come out with in the spring in terms of incentives and indication on a clean energy fuel content to the shipping industry. But at the same time, it's equally very important to try and leverage existing infrastructure as much as possible. As an example, clearly, synthetic methane is a molecule and an e-fuel that can leverage existing infrastructure throughout the entire value chain, because you can use pipeline storage, liquefaction, regasification, and most importantly, factories can run exactly the same. If you were to move into ammonia, there is a market for ammonia today. There are storage infrastructure today. So the infrastructure requirement is more minimal. And you are, in our view, is that we should be targeting first those guys that today use ammonia. So again, just to minimize additional investment when it comes to the factories. When it comes to methanol, that's a little bit more of a niche market where the investment to scale it up would be required both on the infrastructure side as well as the user side. If we move to the power, and I would like to use Medlink as an example, whilst grid and grid upgrades are a global issue, every continent has the need to further invest in grids to strengthen the resilience to cope with the flexibility and volatility of renewables on one side, but also to cope with the increased demand coming from AI data center needs. At the same time, there are parts of the grid which are strong. And that's why Medlink is such an efficient project, because we land and we enter into the Italian grid in points where 100% of my gigawatt can be fully dispatched without any grid upgrade requirements. And that gigawatt, that power, once I land in the northern part of Italy and I enter the Italian transmission grid, I can be in Baden-Württemberg or Bavaria or in Austria without any single investment in terms of grid upgrade. So this is just to answer your question that I think we need to split it in two. Power is one thing and molecules in another. I think on the molecules, blending mandates. On the power, try to leverage, where possible, existing strong infrastructure to pivot and anchor new import and leveraging countries like North Africa, and the same clearly applies to the Middle East, where you can produce effectively baseload power covering sun during the day and wind at night at a very, very competitive cost. And if you move also from east to west, you also have a time zone difference, which is very valuable because you would have power when in the rest of Europe is still early in the morning or late at night.
From your perspective as a developer of clean and green energy projects, how do you view the role of MDBs, multi-development banks, in financing such projects in emerging countries and lower income countries thus far? Why has their impact been so lacking, as many agree?
I think that we need to split again the answer to your question in two. On one side, I think that multilateralists should become more fluent in understanding greenfield projects, because being able to do it also would allow them to have a portion of their budget dedicated to the development capital. So the capital put at risk before you take a final investment decision, which is when everything is locked in, from the sale of your energy to the suppliers and the EPCs. And I think that the role of multilaterals should be to be part of the development journey, because there is a leverage effect and an operational leverage effectively, because by putting few millions in a project during the development phase, you create the opportunity for hundreds of millions of investments on the debt side when the project is the risk. Of course, in order to do this, the issue is not lack of resources, is changing the way they are structured and increase their understanding of the development risk in greenfield project context. At the same time, the role is fundamental for any project that deals with Global South, because ultimately pricing the risk of Global South is important. And if we leave this to traditional institutional investors or commercial lenders, very often they put a premium in terms of risk on the Global South. And that doesn't help the bankability of project, because you're effectively increasing the overall cost of the funding of your project. And all investors that are more used to taking African risk can really price it in the right way. It is as saying that if I need to develop a project in Italy, Italian bank probably will have a better sense of how to price Italian risk than a US bank. I'm just making an example, but this is what you see often in energy infrastructure. So I do believe that they have a fundamental role. They can be an accelerator. In order to be an accelerator, they need to learn how to come into project also earlier and help and take some development risk, and then scale it up in a much more entrepreneurial manner, which I know is not easy given their DNA, and be a little bit more commercial rather than bureaucratic in their approach.
We are entering a new world now where deglobalization and decoupling is taking places, with trade barriers going up and tariffs. How do you see this impacting the build-out of the necessary energy infrastructure that could foster greater decarbonization?
I think that there is always going to remain a regional effect, which is important because it does protect somehow to the risk that you are flagging. If we take Europe, for example, Europe has been historically an importer of fossil energy, whether it was coal or gas. And it is now facing the challenge that with growing power demand, they may also need to import power from neighboring countries. And actually, this allow and open the door to a different type of relationship and cooperation with neighboring countries, both on the other side of the Med or the Middle East, which would have not been there absent the current shift towards cleaner but affordable energy needs. And I think this is a great opportunity. So that's why a project like Medlink makes sense. That's why we will see and expect more of these projects to shape up. Clearly, tariff impact raw materials and component and equipment. And so we will need to kind of see how this phase through. And what we see and expect is a little bit of an adjustment of the trade relationship when it comes to energy between certain continents and others. The tariff has been imposed, but question how much those will be in the end applicable to energy. It may be that they are not. And that could mean that actually, whilst on certain products, the tariff will kind of put distances between US and certain countries, they may not on energy. And again, this will shape the flows of energy between neighboring countries and across different continents in a different manner. But the fundamental message is that actually what is happening can also open opportunities for Europe and neighboring countries to have a different and more intense relationship, even on power, than what has been historically the case looking at natural gas or oil.
Alessandra, keeping in mind that context matters, whether in relation to local circumstances or to resources, national resources, when looking at the potential clean technologies out there today, should we by now, at this stage of the game, have the ability to know which technologies we want to invest in and decide to scale it up? Or should we remain technology agnostic until a market winner arises more clearly?
I think another good element that I see in the current environment is that there is a relatively broad consensus on the fact that the amount of energy that will be required both to support emerging economies in their development and developed market in their additional energy needs for data centers and AI is that we need everything. Today, we need all the available technologies, of course, privileging those that are bringing a lower carbon footprint, but we need renewables, we need nuclear, we will need, and we need hydrogen for those industries that have no alternatives to decarbonize than green hydrogen. But we can build it in steps and in phases. I think hopefully we have left behind us the view that there will be one winner and losers. We really need everything. And what we should focus on is on one side, that of course regulators and policymakers should preserve a neutral approach, just focusing on the carbon content on one side. But on the other side, there is a lot that can be done with existing technologies today, leveraging the reduction in the cost. And where the cost hasn't gone down, but actually has gone up, there is a lot can be done in scaling up manufacturing capabilities in a way that deliver lower costs. Because ultimately, and this is particularly true in subsea cables and great related investments where there are bottlenecks that are very visible today. And this is what we really need to make sure that policymakers also put an attention there, because yes, we're talking about private players, but ultimately scaling up the production capacity, and rather than look at existing manufacturing capabilities and marginally optimize it, is what makes a product from marginally improving its cost to materially improving its cost. And that means ultimately being able to deliver energy at a lower cost and make it more affordable. And once the affordability emerges, that's how the transition will clearly accelerate further.
Alessandra, tell our viewers more about your Medlink project that aims to move green power from North Africa to Europe through Italy via subsea cables, from both a strategic and also some technical perspectives as well.
Yes, it's a project that we started to develop now 3 years ago, still has at least a couple of years of engineering and permitting in front of us. It's 2 + 2 gigawatt of power cables coming from Tunisia and Algeria and landing in the northern part of Italy. We land in the northern part of Italy because of the reason I explained before, because that's where the grid is resilient, that's where demand is, and that's where I'm also, through the existing infrastructure in place, able to deliver that power to the benefit of Swiss, German, Austrian, or other European clients. The technology is a proven technology. The cable is a cable that in certain parts will reach more than 2,000 meters of depth. But today there is available technology that can easily afford that type of depth without energy losses. And that's one of the reasons why projects like this today can be competitive, because you have very little dispersion through the journey. We are also taking care of the development of the greenfield renewable energy in North Africa, and we will be working with partners along the way. We're talking about regeneration that include a combination of wind, solar, and battery storage, in order to have a profile of production that effectively is going to be baseload. And as a baseload power delivered in Europe, that's what industrial clients need, because this, with the entrance of the CBAM on one side and with the ETS system on the other, European industrial clients are penalized in their own final prices by the carbon content of their energy mix. And so there is a great surge or increased demand, so to speak, of industrial clients of green PPA, and that's what Medlink is there for. The project is also developed with the objective to create value for the hosting countries in Africa, because this is in the way we think about it and is an example of a new cooperation or a new partnership approach. And so part of the generation that we are going to develop will be left in countries for local industries in order to help them against the CBAM. And so aside from the traditional local content that it's always important to have in terms of local employment and local suppliers, the other element that we are going to be living on the ground is literally power for consumption at competitive costs for local industrial. And we think that this is one of the reasons why we really found strong support by the governments of the hosting countries, in addition to Italy. The project is a global gateway flagship project, and thanks to the support of the Italian government, but it's also been receiving formal letter of support by the German and the Austrian governments as well, exactly for the reason I just explained, because they can benefit indirectly from this cheap power coming through to their customers and providing a good and a very competitive complement to what may land in Germany, for example, through the offshore wind.
And where have you reached today in terms of the financing and development permitting of the project?
Yeah, we are completed the basis of design. We are in conversation on the concession terms with the hosting countries. We have started the permitting on the Italian side with all the prerequisites that we are obliged to comply with. And these are the two things that will take quite some time, because both the permitting on the Italian landing point side as well as the wind measurement campaign, consequence of the agreement with the hosting countries, will take at least a year and a half. We are already progressing with the identification of the key suppliers, particularly on the long lead items. We will finalize the preferred suppliers probably in the first part of next year, whilst we're moving from a long list to a short list during the course of 2025. So we are currently perfectly on track for a final investment decision by the end of 2027. But of course, there are a number of complexities that we need to work through. And as it is always the case with this type of project, we have experience of integrated energy project. I mean, when I was back at SNAM, I was involved into the transatlantic pipeline, which went through several countries and also included an offshore piece. And this is a job that requires an everyday push, an everyday effort. And so we are very energetic and ready to keep pushing every day. And we think that we can deliver the first interconnector in the Med and open the way to more projects like this in time for where you need to scale up its green energy footprint and renewable footprint in Europe, and giving a substantial contribution to that.